So, hello everybody, and welcome to this Empowered Journalism workshop, in which we'll be talking to a panel of young journalists today. So, my name is Eva, and I'm one of the editors-in-chief at Empowered. And before we get started today, I want to tell you a little bit about the Empowered platform for anybody who's joined who's not an Empowered contributor and wants to know a little bit more about it. So, Empowered Journalism is an award-winning publication led by women, which aims to unite and inspire journalists across the globe. We have a following of over 6,000 people, and our website has just hit 1,000 posts, and we have over 250 contributors writing articles for us on topics ranging from album releases to global breaking news to personal opinion pieces. So we have a massive range of content. You can find us on social media at Empowered Journalism on Twitter and Empowered Journalism everywhere else. And as our platform is mostly filled with young journalists just breaking into the industry, I'm really excited today that we're joined by 4 young journalists at the start of their careers who can pass on their wisdom to all of you. So now I'd like to hand over to Arvi, who's going to introduce herself and then introduce our guests for today.
Thanks so much, Eva. So I'm Arvi. I'm one of the opinion editors at Empoword Journalism, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of our opinions podcast, Empowered Opinions. And I'm really excited to be talking to our 4 guests today. So just going to run through a few introductions. So firstly, we have Asia, who is a freelance journalist and also founder of the Young Journalist community on Facebook, which has over 5,000 members and definitely a place you should join if you're interested in journalism. We also have the 2 Katies, Katie Baggett, firstly, who's a freelance journalist and founder and co-host of Northern Natter, and Katie Williams, who's also a trainee trends writer at Edinburgh Live, as well as being the other half of the Katie duo on Northern Natter as a founder and co-host. And we also have Zisha, who is a freelance journalist specialising in opinion and feature writing with bylines in the Metro, Guardian, Times and Vice. Okay. So before we begin, can I ask each of you, I know I've given you a little bit of an introduction there, but could I ask you to sort of go through, introduce yourself and maybe give us a bit of background about who you are and what you do in the journalism field, and especially for the young journalists here who want to get interested in how to get into journalism. I think that'd be really interesting. If I go to Asia first.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm a bit ill, so if I suddenly have a coughing fit, sorry about that. Yeah, so I've just graduated, and so I started properly doing freelance journalism whilst I was at university. And now I've sort of trying to transfer out of freelance journalism and get into a staff writer role. So I've just been applying for lots of jobs, but I largely pitch and write like culture pieces, some opinion-y pieces, some like social commentary, that kind of vibe for various places. And yeah, that's me. And I approve posts on Young Journalist community as well. So that is me.
Really cool, thank you. Next we'll go to Katie Baggett.
Hi, I'm Katie. I am a journalist for a charity in Durham. I started that job about 5 months ago, and I do quite a lot of social media. I'm creating a podcast for them at the moment. That's something that I love to do, obviously with Northern Natter as well, and a lot of the communications for the charity as well. And in my spare time, I co-host and co-produce the podcast Northern Natter with Katie Williams, who's also on this as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Katie, would you be able to give us a small intro about yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Katie. So I'm currently in the hairdressers, which is why my camera's off. And if it's a bit noisy, I'm really sorry, and I hope you can hear me okay. But I'm Katie Williams. I graduated from Stirling Uni about 2 years ago in 2019.
Where's your friend?
And I was a waitress for a while, and I just sort of did like some freelancing things and tried to get as much experience as I can. And then over the pandemic, me and Katie started Northern Natter, and at this about April or May, I became the trainee trends writer at Edinburgh Live, which is run by Reach PLC.
Very cool, thank you so much. And last but not least, Zisha.
Okay, I'm going to start by apologising if you hear my baby sister or her YouTube videos, because she's sat in the background and she won't go anywhere else. I hope that's fine. I'm Zisha. I'm a first-year student doctor at the University of Liverpool, and I started freelancing, I would say, in August 2020, and I've just sort of been working my way through it in any way I can. And I also do freelance shifts at Metro, so I commission and edit pieces for their opinion section, so platform. And yeah, I just love writing opinion and features, and especially stuff to do with like health and science. So that's me.
That's really great. Thank you so much. And no worries for all of the small things you mentioned. The first question we have for all of you is, I think, a nice one. It's, what's the best piece of advice anyone has ever given you? If I can come first to Katie Baggett.
Probably, sort of like be nice to everyone, because you never know who you'll meet on your way up. Been on like quite a lot of like work placements where I've done like 1 or 2 weeks experience, and then been in like jobs before the job I'm in now, and like met people who I've been there with. So yeah, I'd say definitely like be respectful and be polite to everyone that you meet, because you might meet them like in another placement or another job, and believe in yourself. I think the journalism industry, it's a really, like, it can be a really challenging industry, but I think if you've got the self-confidence and the passion behind yourself, you'll go really far.
That's great, thank you. And I think, yeah, really, really strong advice there. Asia, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, no, totally agree with that advice. I would probably say the advice that I've been trying to take more myself that I was given is to read as much as possible, as well as like articles. Obviously, you want to be keeping up with the news, but also just like around subjects, different books, different like longer forms of nonfiction, to inform your worldview and your writing and your perspective on things, or just make you a stronger journalist, especially when you're starting out. So yeah, definitely read as much as you can.
I definitely agree with that. I think it's always great to be a really well-rounded person, and reading always helps with that. Zisha, what were your thoughts?
So I remember when I was starting out, and an editor at the time was having a chat with me, and she said that if you're like a student and you want to start out in proper journalism, like in national journalism, start with what you know. So, you know, you will get, because they've already got columnists and stuff writing about Brexit and COVID-19 and whatnot. But if you can find like your own take on it, so say if you're a university student and you can report on stuff from that angle, then you're more likely to sort of be approached by editors, because obviously their journalists can't cover stuff like that. So if there's like a particular experience you're good at, or sort of if you're a university student or something like that, then, you know, really start out with that, and then, you know, once you've sort of found your feet, you can branch out. So that was possibly the best piece of advice I was given.
Yes, I think that's really good. And I saw your piece about being a medicine student during COVID and how that was. And I think, yeah, really bodes well for people trying to get in. Last but not least, Katie Williams, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with everyone's bit of advice, especially the reading. Like, I definitely don't read enough. And when I do read, I do find my writing is actually better. So I think my bit of advice, I was told by a tutor, it was, there's no such thing as a shy journalist. Basically, you just have to put yourself out there. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, right, okay, I have to just go for it. You know, ask people if they've got a story, don't be scared about asking questions. So yeah, that's what I would say. Sorry, that was quite noisy. The big buses keep going past. I'm really sorry if that's quite disruptive.
No, it's no worries. Don't worry about it at all. I thought that was really great advice as well, and really interesting. Thank you so much for all of that. I'm going to hand over to Eva now.
Just before I ask the next question, just to let everybody know, if you want to pop any questions into the chat, we're going to have some time at the end to ask our panelists any questions that you have. So if you have any questions about starting out in journalism or pitching or anything specifically related to their expertise, then please feel free to put them in the chat, because we'll definitely have time to get to some of those at the end. So the next question for our panelists is, what is the one thing you wish you'd known when you started out? So if you could go back and tell yourself in hindsight kind of like a piece of advice to your former self, what would that kind of be? And I go to Asia first on that one, if that's okay.
Gosh, so many things. I'm trying to pick on one. Probably that it's always like there's never going to be, well, thus far, I don't know, maybe in the future it'll be different, but so far in my journey there's never really been a point where I'm suddenly like, I'm a journalist now. Like I always feel a bit like an imposter, or like I'm still figuring things out, or like I'm not quite there yet. So sort of like it's okay to sort of like fake it till you make it, and like just keep on going. And you are a journalist if you say you're a journalist, and you're working towards that, and you're talking to people. And so yeah, just sort of having more faith in who you actually are is something I wish that I'd had a lot earlier on, and it probably would have given me a lot more confidence.
Perfect. That was amazing advice. Sorry, I was kind of swept up in your advice there. I forgot I was actually needed to talk again. But yeah, no, thank you so much for that, because I think it's really important to talk about things like imposter syndrome, especially with student journalists kind of trying to break into the field of journalism. I'll go to Katie Baggett next. So same question to you. What's one thing you wish you'd known at the start of your journalism career?
You don't need an NCTJ qualification for every journalism job. I wish someone had told me that at the start. I think work experience and like starting a passion project and using your own initiative goes a long way. I see quite a lot of jobs now asking for like experience in that sort of sector in the industry, and not many jobs, unless you're going for like court reporter job or a job in like a local newspaper, that they actually ask for the NCTJ. So definitely if you're at uni, have a chat with like your tutors, people in like higher years, see whether that's the sort of right route for you, because it might not necessarily be the career that you want in the future.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially considering that a lot of our contributors come from very different backgrounds. So it's really reassuring to know, I presume, for a lot of contributors that you don't have to have one specific route into journalism. There are lots of different ways that you can get into it, which is, again, really nice to know. I'll go to Zisha next. The same question to you again. What's one piece of advice you'd give to your former self?
That Twitter isn't real life. And I think that's something that every journalist will say to you, because obviously, especially in the pandemic, you know, I started out, you know, through Twitter. One of the ways I grew my portfolio and stuff was engaging with other young journalists through Twitter. In fact, the panelists, I've met pretty much all of them on Twitter before. But it shouldn't center around who you are and who you are as a journalist. So I remember when I was starting out, and I started commissioning in sort of May, and I didn't get my first commission until the end of August. And you'd go onto Twitter and you would see people say, wow, I've got a book deal. Wow, I've got a 7 new commissions. Wow, I've got a cover feature or something. And it can really sort of put you down, and you can go, well, they're all getting this sort of stuff. Why aren't I? And especially for student journalists, you sort of forget that these people are sort of, you know, older than you and they're way more experienced than you and stuff. So yeah, Twitter isn't real life, and I should have just taken it at my own pace.
Thank you for that. Again, I think that's really reassuring for people just starting out to know that kind of social media and the facade that you see on social media isn't the same for everyone. And somebody's just said in the chat, actually, so Simran's just said, really needed to hear this. Thanks, Zisha. Just started freelancing and I feel this way often. And I think, again, yeah, it's really reassuring for people to know that all those people posting their wins on Twitter aren't posting their rejections and the things that they don't get the opportunities for, which is, again, really important to remember. And then finally, Katie Williams, same question to you.
Yeah, I really want to echo what Zisha said there. You know, Twitter is not real life. And I mean, to put it in context, you know, I graduated in 2019 and I only got my first journalism job this year, you know, at the age of almost 27. So it's okay to go at your own pace, and you don't try not to compare yourself to other people. Another bit of advice I wish I had taken note of and actually remembered is keep and save your contacts. So I did some work experience at a radio station in Glasgow. So I had loads of phone numbers from people I've interviewed, people I worked with, PR people, and I didn't save a single one. So I was getting phone calls from them being like, oh, I have a missed call from you. And I had no idea who that was. So like I just lost basically a story. And then these people might be, you know, these people would have been helpful now in my job, and I can't remember what number it is. So, you know, definitely save the numbers, make a note of who they are, what they can provide. You know, is it a shop owner? Is it a student? Is it a doctor? These sort of things it's really important to keep a note of and save. And in my new job now, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Katie. Again, I think that's really important for people to remember, especially with networking being such a big part of journalism. And I know we're going to come on to that later. But I'm going to hand back over to Arby now for our next question.
Yeah, thank you so much for those. I'm going to jot those down afterwards. I thought it was really interesting. This next question is something which I think will really sort of help a lot of people in our both our community and on this call, because I know a lot of people start out in student media, and I was wondering what you guys thought about making the leap from student outlets to mainstream / more professional ones, and how do you do that? What's it like? Is there anything you can do to make it easier? And is it really as big a deal as people make out? So basically, what were your thoughts on going from student to more professional media? If I come to Zisha first.
That's a really good question. So yeah, I didn't really start out with any sort of uni publication because I wasn't at uni at the time. So I sort of did something similar to how Empowered Journalism is. You've got Youth Politics UK, these sort of these independent organisations giving the chance for people to write and stuff. And I wrote a few pieces for them, and then my friend, who's also an editor at Youth Politics UK, said to me that instead of pitching all these ideas to me about how students are affected by COVID, why don't you pitch this to an editor at like some publication? And that's where I got my first commission at Metro. So I think for me, the jump between student media and national media was writing an opinion piece for a publication who are known for usually taking on first-time writers. So my bit of advice for anyone starting out would be that try to find publications who are happy to work with first-time writers or even student writers at the moment. And like, if you don't know who they are, then you can always approach somebody on Twitter and be like, can I have some advice or something? Personally for me, it wasn't as big of a jump as I thought it would be. I thought it would be huge, when in fact it wasn't. But the jump between student writing and sort of writing a feature and then writing a feature for a national publication, that jump was huge because they expected something completely different. So yeah, that's all I've got to say.
That's really interesting. Can I just ask what the difference was for the feature writing?
Oh, so with the one I wrote for like a student publication, it wasn't a good feature. I'm going to be really honest with you. It wasn't the best bit of work I've ever done. With the one, I think it was Vice, that was one of the first ones I did. They were very particular on the way I laid it out and how I referenced my sources and how I put the context in. But it ended up just being a formula that you learn, and I just now use that formula everywhere. But I think the most important thing was that I had a really good editor. And I think if you're starting out and you have a really kind editor who doesn't mind going over your 10th draft, and still publishing it, then it really gives you that confidence boost. So he literally rewrote my piece, but he literally taught me how to write it as well. And so the next piece I filed for him 2 weeks later, it was like nearly perfect.
I think that's really interesting and a really good point about editing as well. I think it's obviously always useful to have really good context, but to find someone who's that helpful and willing to help you is it's amazing. And I'm really glad you're all here to help the next sort of generation of people trying to get in. So sort of a good precedent to set. Sort of same question then about moving from student media to more professional media. Can I come to Katie Baggett next?
I was involved in the student radio station at the University of Sunderland, Spark, and I was in like the 3 years I was at uni. We did a lot for like obviously the Brexit. We did like a referendum special on air. The general election as well, like going to like I went down to Spennymoor and reported on it, and there was like lots of different reporters there. And I think when you're like on the job and getting into broadcast journalism, that's something that I really found helpful when I was a student. But I think like the difference moving into more of a professional role, just kind of like be prepared to listen and don't be afraid that your first draft isn't going to necessarily be the like most perfect piece of work. Crafting your writing as well, I think, is really important. So writing for different publications or writing like maybe less of a niche subject would be my advice.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. and really helpful for people sort of who've got really heavily involved in street media and to like get out into something else and sort of reaching that new environment. Can I come to Katie Williams next?
Yeah, so I would definitely say in sort of professional setting, everything like the turnaround is insane. Like when they say, oh, this is like do these stories, it's meant to be done like within a couple of hours. So you've only got maybe between half an hour to an hour for one story. And that was definitely the biggest shock factor. And that's been when I've worked in radio and in digital newsrooms as well. But it's something that you pick up. I mean, in the job I'm in now, so my first week I was maybe doing 3 to 5 stories a day. And then I said to my editor, I was like, oh, is this okay? Am I doing enough? And she was like, oh no, we do expect like 6 to 8 a day. So at the moment I'm doing maybe between 5 and 6. And I think I've been here for 3 or 4 months now. So it is just practice and you do get used to it. But yeah, just to prepare anyone when they, in student journalism, I found maybe they're a bit more lenient, you can take maybe, I think I had a week one time to write one story. And that wouldn't cut it in the real world.
Yeah, I think thank you for that. I think sort of when you ask this question, it's like, what kind of answer do you expect? And I think it's natural to assume that. Sorry, Katie, do you mind putting yourself on mute?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I suppose it's just you do expect student media to be a more nicer and helpful environment because it's naturally meant to be helpful and sort of engaging for people who want to start out. But yeah, interesting to learn about how different professional media is, even though you expect it to be harder. But it's good that you find you get used to it. I was wondering, Asia, I know you sort of just recently got more involved in professional media, but how have you found that difference?
Yeah, so sort of when I was starting, I have a couple of pieces of advice that I wish I'd known. First is sort of perseverance. If you're trying to get like your first bylines, there's a bit of luck in it. Some people are really lucky that like they send the right email to the right editor at the right time and like they manage to get the byline. But often it's the case that like for myself, I had set myself the goal that I really wanted to get a piece into Galdem. This was like 2 years ago now. And I pitched them so many times and just never heard back. And I can't actually think of how many times I must have pitched them, like upwards of 15. And eventually I got an email being like, hi, you and a couple of other people have pitched us so many times. So do you want to like come for a workshop and we'll like help you figure out like how to pitch basically. And like, it's when I went to that workshop with like the Galdem editors that I got to talk to them, built a relationship with them and like got my first bylines with them. And like, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't like persevered with pitching and like kept backing myself, even though I kept on getting rejected. And it was similar with my first byline for the Metro, where I had an idea that I'd pitched to loads of places and it kept on getting rejected. And then eventually, like a year after I thought of the idea, I like restructured it slightly and sent it over to the Metro, and then finally an editor picked it up there. So I think it's a lot of perseverance behind the scenes for a lot of journalists, where you obviously see the final piece, but you don't know like the journey it's been on to get to that point where it's actually published. And then sort of the other one, and more practical advice to anybody listening, is there are a couple of places that help with manufacturing your first pitch. I know that Journo Resources now has the page where they have a pitch library that has pitches that you can look at to form your own. They also have a great list of editors, and on the young journalist community there's also a couple of documents you can look at that basically just guide you through the pitching process and how to form a pitch. Yeah, so you should definitely check those out if you're pitching for the first time. So yeah, sort of doing that step is like the most difficult bit, I think. And then once you've started actually talking to editors and built a relationship with them, then it's easy. It slowly gets easier naturally to sort of reach out to people and get pieces placed.
Thank you so much for that. Some like amazing advice there, and really interesting to hear your journey in getting into more professional environments. I'm going to pass over to Eva now for the next question.
Thank you, Adi. So I'm quite like this next question because it's something that I'd quite like to know myself, because I'm not very good at this. So it's, how do you deal with knockbacks? So for example, with pitches or job interviews. So when you get a rejection, like coming through, how do you deal with that? How do you pick yourself up from that and then move on to the next thing? I'm going to go to Katie Williams first with that question.
Yeah, so I'm not very good at it either. I take it quite personally. And yeah, I'm terrible with rejection just in general. But definitely, it's so easy to say, but try not to take it to heart and just think, think about how many other people are pitching to these places. And I think I want to clarify as well, like in my job, I do have to pitch, but they're not features really. I maybe do a feature a week. And if something isn't working for you, just look at it and see if you can do something different, or even ask the editor, how is there anything that will make it work, basically. It's okay to have that conversation with editors, whether that's if you're in a staff job or pitching as well. It's okay to have that back and too, because they might say that like the news hook isn't strong enough, or that they've got something similar. If it's something similar, then look for a different angle. If it's a news hook, then like look at the calendar. If there's like special days coming up, for example, like today's like Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. So have you got a story that could revolve around something like that? And it's really, I don't know, the way that I think about it is it's just, okay, what can I do to then progress? How can I make sure it lands, or it might be a little bit more successful next time? That's it.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's really good advice, I think. And I think it's, again, really important to remember that it's not personal. It's often just the editor doesn't want that story at that particular time for whatever reason. So again, it's kind of trying to not take it personally and kind of remove the emotion from it almost, I think. So I'll come to Asia next with the same question about how you deal with knockbacks.
So sort of like linking back to what Zisha was saying about Twitter not being real life, like originally I took rejection really hard because I thought that everybody else was constantly successful, so there clearly was something wrong with me, which I very quickly unlearned because that's obviously not true. But especially recently, I've tried to like be a bit more honest, especially on social media, about like during this job search, I've had so many rejections, and a lot of the time I've like, it's been hard, but when I was talking to one of my friends, she was sort of like, you're sort of the right thing will happen when it's meant to happen. So it's kind of the attitude I'm taking, like with jobs specifically, sort of, oh, that clearly wasn't the right role for me, but the right role will come up and I'll be really happy that I was rejected from the last thing so that I could have like got to this point, is sort of more of the attitude I'm trying to take. And like with pitches as well, like it's clearly, it's like a sign for you to sort of like step back and rethink, oh, okay, like what was it that wasn't quite working? How can I better it? And like use that as a chance to grow. But also it's okay to be sad. I've been really sad about things and then just wallowed in the sadness and then been like, okay, that was really awful and I'm sad about that. And now I'm going to spring back and carry on. So giving yourself a break and just being kind to yourself, because like you don't need to just like be this iron, like ruthless person all the time in journalism. Like it is okay to just like be a human with feelings and be sad about rejection. So yeah, and then just sort of processing it and moving on is probably my best piece of advice.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really valuable to remember that there's that balance between like allowing yourself to feel the feelings and then also keeping persevering and remembering that like social media is not real life and keeping that positive outlook. I'm going to go to Katie Baggett then next with the same question.
I think like remember the opportunities you've got in front of you. So I know at my uni we had like a careers and employability service. So they had like interview coaching that you could go to, and like if you brought a list of questions that you thought were going to be asked in like your job interview, they'd go through them as well. So you get certain competency questions at job interviews, and like the question you get asked, like, have you ever been in a situation where this has happened? Always to remember the STAR technique, which is situation, task, action and result. And that's something like I never knew, like that's how the sort of do job interviews and they ask certain questions. So yeah, if that's available to you, definitely get in touch with your careers advice service. I think for me, for like rejections and everything, like everyone goes through it, and I think you've got to kind of like remove yourself from the situation a little bit. I think social media can kind of, I don't know, be a bit of a menace at times. So maybe try and stay off Twitter when you're like going through like a sort of rejection sort of phase. But yeah, everyone goes through it and you will get there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Katie. I think it's, again, really important to remember that kind of we're all in the same boat in that situation and that everybody experiences rejection on some level. And again, as we keep saying, like, Twitter's not real life, remembering that the people on the timeline having all those wins are also having rejections as well. You're just not seeing them. So finally, Zisha, I'd like to go to you with the same question about dealing with rejection.
So I mean, this is quite a, like, I had quite a bad rejection, I think literally the other day. So I had a piece killed after writing it for like a newspaper. And if this was Zisha who was in like September, she would have taken it to heart. She would have been like, no, I can't do this anymore. I would have basically beaten myself up so much. But now you've just got to, I mean, now I sort of accept that it's sort of part of the whole thing. Like, I'm going to get commissions, I'm going to get shifts, and I'm also not going to get commissions and I'm not going to get shifts. And at this point in time, I've sort of accepted it. And I think reevaluate, I mean, I keep talking about Twitter, but it's because it does have such a big impact on student journalists and freelance journalists. You know, ever since I sort of reevaluated my relationship with that social media, it really sort of changed my perspective. So in July, I sort of took sort of 10, 15 days completely off Twitter. So I didn't even touch it. And before that, I was a very online person. You would see me tweeting at 2 or 3 in the morning and having conversations with random people. Now I don't do anything. Now I will check it maybe once or twice a week or something. I won't really sort of see what's going on it. Also because I've got other stuff going on, but I think those 10 days sort of taking a break really helped. And so I'd say for anyone who's sort of getting rejections at first, is that everyone gets them. You know, you may see someone and be like, wow, they're such a successful person, they're writing for X, Y, Z, but you don't know that they could have had 4 pieces killed the other day. And I've also talked about this before, that we need to be quite honest, more honest, I think, about it. I think we also need to sort of post the fact that we've had a piece killed, a pitch rejected. You know, we've been told that our idea is not good. And I think finally as well, being honest with yourself, and sort of saying to yourself that your self-worth isn't based on how many commissions you get. Your personality isn't based on how many editors say that your piece is great. It's about who you are. And one way to really help with that is to make friends who aren't journalists, because they're just there to give you that reality check. So most of my friends are fellow medics, and so they're really good. When I'm like, oh, I got a piece killed, they're like, Zisha, in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. So I think having that reality check it really helps dealing with it.
Yeah, again, I think there are some really valuable points there, especially about kind of getting that reality check from people outside of the journalism bubble. I think that's really important. And as well, I really like that you mentioned about the honesty on Twitter. And I also wish that people did post sort of their fails a little bit more, because it would make things a little bit more balanced, especially for people just starting out. It kind of seems like everybody's winning all the time, and obviously that's just not the case. So I'm going to pass back to Arvi now for our next question.
Yeah, so a bit of a change of topic. I suppose it's the question for when you've gotten over the knockbacks. Where do you find your inspiration for journalism and keeping your ideas fresh and up to date? I know, I think it was Katie Williams was talking about looking up days that are coming up and seeing if you can pitch something along those lines. But what other sort of things do you do to find that inspiration to keep up with the rolling content 24/7? If I come to Asia first.
Yeah, so I suppose the most obvious piece of advice is talk to people, especially who aren't in journalism. Like, listen to people mainly, actually. Like, I get most of my ideas from either social media. It's probably like a 70-30 split. 70% is like from social media, what's trending, what are people talking about, and seeing like what my thoughts are on that, and if I would want to pitch something about that. And then sort of like the other 30% of the time, it's literally just listening to people. Like when I was a uni student, I was like listening on campus, what are my friends talking about, what are they complaining about, sort of talking to my family and community about like what issues they're facing. And like they won't necessarily be like, Asia, you're a journalist, here's like the problem I'm facing. It's more like you need to be like, oh, that's really interesting, like I didn't realize that was happening, and then sort of asking them about it. So that's probably the 2 places that I most get my inspiration, especially because a lot of the work that I do like generally is around like identity, community, and like marginalized communities in the UK. So just sort of like talking to people, and then sort of beyond that, my advice would probably be don't limit yourself and try to pigeonhole yourself very quickly into your journey, and sort of try and make, I felt a weird urgency to make a niche very quickly. I'm not sure why that was, but I thought as soon as the sooner I make a niche, the like more likely I'll be to get commissioned. I don't know. But since I lost that mindset and I was much more open to just like writing what I wanted to write and what I felt like and what I was interested in, that has opened me up to like a whole world of like interests. And like before I was a lot more like, oh, I definitely want to do politics or social commentary, and like I'm just going to concentrate all of my time on pitching stuff around that. Whereas now I'm like, oh, actually culture pieces are really great and involve that kind of thing, and now I'm pitching more of that. So sort of don't narrow yourself down really quickly. There's no pressure to do it. Like keep your mind open, and like you don't necessarily need to just like stay within one niche.
Really interesting. Thank you for that. And I really like the idea about sort of making sure your options are broad, because I've heard that thing about being a niche writer, and you almost feel like if you're niche enough, then everyone will come to you for that specific content. But sort of makes more sense that if you're broader, then you'll be able to cater for more audiences. And so I like that. Sort of coming to Katie Baggett, same question.
I'd say read outside of your comfort zone. That's something that I didn't do when I was at uni. I've kind of just pigeonholed myself into certain things. And also try to be kind of like ask people's opinions and be like part of a team more. I was very independent when I was a student. I was like, right, I'll do all this, I'll do it myself, like I'll get on with it. And I think you've got to be like accepting of other people's opinions, and that like, especially like when you're designing things or creating content that, you know, people can read over and give you tips and give you help. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask for help and try not to be so independent, because you can do it, but you know, it's good to have a team on board.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, really like that as well. Trying to think, I feel like a lot of times when I'm writing, I always think that I can do everything myself, but those few times that I've sort of branched out and been like, actually, can you help me with this? It's become a much better piece because it's always going to be more well-rounded. I'll come to Zisha next.
So I'm going to echo what Asia said about like talking to other people and stuff, because having conversations with family and friends, especially if they're not journalists, and you can learn so much from that. So for instance, my piece on vaccine hesitancy started from a Snapchat conversation with a friend I had about the vaccine. So we were just talking about it, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to take it, I'm so excited. She was like, well, I'm not going to take it. And then at home, obviously I had some people who were expressing concern, and then you go on like the internet and you realize that no one's written about it, and that's just sort of, you know, a sudden spark of inspiration. And also about what Asia said about not putting yourself into a niche, I was the opposite of Asia. I was like to myself, I don't want to have a niche, because I was just so scared of being pigeonholed into one section and just staying there for the rest of my life. So I've written about everything from Call the Midwife to being a medical student to vaccines to the best ways to go to sleep and stuff like that. And I think in terms of inspiration, as a uni student, it's quite easy at the moment because COVID is such a hot topic. So I can literally pitch anything in sort of the lenses of COVID, and it would be like an idea worth writing about. And then also just seeing what's on the news as well, that can be quite interesting. So if you want to write a feature and you see a news report and you go, oh, well, maybe I could look into that a bit more. And personal experiences to some extent. So for instance, I knew as soon as I started freelancing that one piece that I'm really going to write about is my name, because no one else like has my name and the challenges that come with it. So I think it's about drawing different inspirations and also not panicking if you don't have any inspiration. So like right now, I'm not pitching anything at all, and I have zero inspiration to write anything. Sorry. So I like I was saying, like at the moment, I'm a complete slump. So I haven't pitched anything. I haven't really written about anything because I've got loads of like uni work going. And if this was me 6 months ago, I would have been really panicking because I'm like, I need to write, I need to get a commission. Now I'm like, that's fine. You know, something will come along and I'll write about it. So, yeah.
Just before I move on, I just wanted to follow up and ask about when you do personal opinion pieces, or if you think about doing them, do you ever get nervous about putting your sort of personal story out there for other people to read?
I think, well, I can't obviously speak for everyone because people have different experiences to mine. The two pieces I've written about, one was sort of about A-level results day, and the other one was sort of about my name, and that's pretty much the most personal stuff I've ever done, because the rest of my opinion pieces are sort of more political. And I wanted to write about those experiences because like I've had them so often, I want other people to know about it. But like I would say that, you know, before pitching a personal piece, you just need to remember that it's going to be on the internet for like forever. So it's not something that, you know, when you come back 20 years time, you'll sort of regret writing. Because at first it's easy to sort of get swept into the whole, yeah, I'm getting a commission to write about this traumatic incident that I've had. But you don't know 10 years down the line, you're like, well, do I really want people to know about that? So always double check that, especially if you're pitching like a personal piece.
Great, thank you for that. I'll come to Asia because I know you've got your hand up.
Yeah, no, I quickly wanted to hop on that answer as well, that I sprinkled in with like other stuff. I've done quite a few personal essays, and sort of as I've gone along, I've learned a lot about my like line when it comes to personal essays. And like the biggest thing for me, if people are thinking, because quite a lot of my personal essays are quite vulnerable, they're about my relationship either with like my community and romance, or like I've written a piece about like being part of the LGBTQ plus community and stuff. And like, to be honest, a lot of these pieces I've never sent the links to my parents either, because they're just like, I don't know how happy they would be with them. So generally my line is sort of like, I really care about where I really think about where I'm pitching it and which editor I'm working with. Like mostly with personal essays now, I only pitch to places that care about women of color and marginalized voices like Geldem or Aurelia, where I trust the editors to like help me with my story and not take advantage of it or use bits that I'm not comfortable adding in. So like if you're going to pitch a personal essay that you care about and want people to read about, but is quite vulnerable, I would say really think about where you're pitching it to and who you're going to be working with, because that makes the biggest difference with like your experience of actually writing about those kinds of things. So that would be my bit of advice.
Thank you for that. I think, yeah, something that I was curious about. So I hope that's helpful for someone else as well. Last but not least, can I come to Casey Williams?
Yeah. What was the question again?
Oh, sorry. It's where do you find inspiration for your journalism and keep your ideas fresh and up to date?
Yes. So as a trends writer, it's basically in the name. I have to know what's trending. So every day, it's very rare that I can really plan like a week ahead, because it just won't happen unless like there's an event, and then I can. So for example, the NTA Awards happened last night, so I just put in a marker last night to be like NTA, loads of question marks, being like, is it something we can write on? Don't know. Is a Scottish actor going to win? They did, but so things like that. So yeah, I would say look on Google Trends is something that we do. So I just want to like clarify, like I am in like local journalism, so in Google Trends I type in Edinburgh and see what's trending, and if anything there comes up, if we can do a sort of explainer. So for example, this place called Ninja Warrior was trending in linking to Edinburgh, so there's actually like a Ninja Warrior adventure park thing in Leith, so I had to write about that, and now I'm trying to pitch, like trying to go there and like have a video of me doing it. I'm still working on it. They're not too sure about it, but I'm working on it. And yeah, just as you said, look at Twitter and social media and speaking to people, and just to see what's happening. And if you can try and take a slightly different angle, so you kind of stand out. So like, I don't want our content on Edinburgh Live to be exactly the same as Glasgow Live, so I want to have and try and find like a different angle, and that's usually trying to find like an Edinburgh contributor or an Edinburgh voice in there as well. So things like that. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, no, it definitely does. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass back over to Eva now.
So this is our final question before we move on to the few questions that we've got in the chat, which are looking really, really good, by the way. Also, if anybody has any more questions, pop them in the chat now, and then we might have time to get to them. We might not, we'll see. So my last question to our panelists today is, what are your best networking tips? Because obviously, as we know, networking is a big part of journalism, especially, again, we keep coming back to it, but especially with the rise of like Twitter and social media. So making those connections. And I know Katie Williams touched on that a little bit earlier. So I'd like to go back to you, Katie, and ask if you've got any kind of networking tips or like things that you regret doing. So you were talking before about not keeping phone numbers.
Yeah, don't do that. That's a big note. Yeah, do save and keep numbers, and even like, I think some people have like an Excel spreadsheet of contacts, and that's a good thing to do. I am not as organized to do that, but I'm working on it. And networking tips, I would say just go for it. Like, don't be scared to reach out to people. And again, like over the past, however long it's been, 18 months now or whatever, you know, we're very much used to digital interaction. So it's okay to send someone a DM on Twitter. If you want someone like that's quite professional. So for example, I was trying to reach out to Fiona Stoker, who reports on BBC Scotland, and she's a senior journalist and news reporter there. And I DM'd her on Twitter and she never replied. But I think if I'd actually emailed her, she would have replied. So kind of judge who you're getting in touch with and have what you think is the most professional way. And you don't have to make it a big deal. It can just be like, oh, I really appreciate your work. Would you mind having a look over this? Or have you got any advice for something? And if you're wanting to network with someone, maybe like around your level or maybe just a bit above, it's okay to say, do you want to go for a coffee or like a virtual coffee or something, and just chat over whatever you want to do, you know. Don't be scared about doing that, because it is, I think it's quite normalized now, and most, like 9 times out of 10, these people want to help you. You know, I think there's this sort of myth that this industry is really cutthroat, and it is, but at the end of the day, everyone started somewhere, and those people haven't got somewhere like without a little bit of support in some way. So it's okay to take advantage of that. That's it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Katie. I think it's really nice to hear you talking about kind of not giving up and making sure that you're reaching out to people a lot. Because I know that I get quite scared sometimes to like DM people on Twitter and make those connections. And I think it's really important that like young journalists who are on this call remember that you are still like able to reach out to people, and you're still able to kind of make those connections if you want to. I'll go to Asya then next about any networking tips that you have.
Sorry.
Katie.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, of course.
I don't know if anyone watching, this isn't a shameless plug, I promise, but on our Northern Ireland newsletter, I have said a few times, and I want to say it here, that like Reach PLC is, sorry, that's a big noisy exhaust. They do hire quite a lot, and if anyone has any questions or wants advice on applying for jobs around, you know, these companies like that, do get in touch with me. I'm sure you'll share my socials, but you'll find me on Twitter, and yeah, like I'm happy to help you, because I had help in applying for this job, and like people looked over my CV and everything like that, and if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have got this job with Edinburgh Live. So I'm more than happy to now offer that help and support back. So if anyone wants, you know, some help with that, please get in touch.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Katie. And then, yeah, at the end of the call, we're going to give you an opportunity to kind of promote your socials and where people can find you. So yeah, I'd like to go to Asya next with the same question about how best to network as someone just starting out in journalism.
Yeah, so I think it's a lot of trial and error. At least it was for me, where I sort of, well, not to shamelessly plug, but Young Journalist Community is a nice place on Facebook if you want to come along. That's like a good place to sort of just like ask questions and like reach out to people. And like, I know quite a lot of people on the group, they'll like post something like, anybody else going to do this very specific course at this very specific place, and then like 25 people will reply being like, yeah, and then they'll start a group chat. So that's quite nice. So that's like a good place, sort of like putting yourself out there and being like, hey, I'm about to do this course, or I'm interested in this area and want to talk to other people who are interested in this area. Like if you tweet it or put it on a Facebook group, like similar to that, like people are so eager to get in to talk to other people, because freelance journalism particularly is so lonely that you'll get a positive response 99% of the time. So putting yourself out there is quite important. And also, yeah, shooting your shot in a sensible way is good. Don't pester and harass people and like constantly message them, like, if you know, like, set boundaries. But sort of, you know, if there's, I currently have the person who's like my mentor who helps me. Originally they'd like vaguely put out a tweet saying, oh, I'd love to help some young journalists, and like off the back of that I'd message them being like, hey, I'm a young journalist and I'd love some help. And now like we're really good friends, and like they, whenever I have questions, I message them and they help out. So definitely sort of just like repping yourself and backing yourself, because often you'll get quite a good response. But sort of like my final thing is like have a healthy relationship with networking. There was a point sometime last year where, gosh, my professional personal life boundaries were so blurred. It was definitely unhealthy. I was like constantly on Twitter, on different group chats, talking to people, on Facebook groups, talking to people, like it was almost my entire life. And I just had one day had to take a step back and be like, okay, I want my WhatsApp to only be for my friends. So I'm going to remove myself from any WhatsApp groups. I'm only going to go on Young Journalist Community during these hours, like it's working hours. And sort of, yeah, putting boundaries for yourself and remembering that networking and actually being friends with people is different things, and you should set boundaries for yourself so that it's healthy. It's definitely my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Asya. I think it's really important, again, talking about boundaries. And I think we've spoken a lot on this call about kind of the balance between putting yourself forward as a journalist and making those steps in your career, but also looking after yourself and making sure that you're having that healthy work-life balance that a lot of journalists sadly don't seem to have at the moment. So now I'd like to go to Katie Baggett for the same question. So what are your networking tips?
Get a LinkedIn account and ask for recommendations. That's something I didn't know about when I was at uni. And send an email out thanking people for the time if you've been on like a virtual coffee or you've like been in contact with them for some advice. It really creates that sort of like long-lasting impression, and you know, it's nice to be nice. I think if you're looking at like in-person networking events, like having your business card is like a really good piece of advice that I got was when I was at uni, with like a link to your portfolio on there, because you never know when like people need freelancers for shifts. So yeah, definitely, like obviously if we get back to in-person networking events, that's something that I'd really offer some advice about. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. I think that's really valuable, again, because I know a lot of people, well, I mean, a lot of people, me, can be quite scared of LinkedIn because it is quite intimidating as somebody starting out. And so, yeah, it's quite refreshing to know that there is help out there if you want it on those kind of platforms. And then finally, Zisha, same question. What are your best networking tips?
My first tip would be don't be shy, because what's the worst that someone's going to say to you? No, which is very uncommon. When I was started out, I had like this leap of like a lot of confidence, and I emailed an opinion editor at a national paper for advice, and they got back to me. They shared their number and checked my initial pieces, and we're still in contact with each other, and she's given me a commission or two as well. So sometimes being I think Asya said it before, fake it till you make it. That really just pay off in the beginning. And also, once you've written something for an editor, don't sort of just forget about them for the rest of your life. Pitch to them again, because even if they say no, it will start building that sort of professional relationship with them. Because if you're in their inbox more often, they may go, oh, well, they've written for me before, well, maybe they can work on this again for me. I mean, it's happened to me with certain newspapers that I would pitch, and then I'd pitch again, and they would be like, yeah, okay, because once they know you, then it's more likely for you to get a commission. And I'd also say that if a journalist is offering you help, don't take that for granted. Don't like just read the DM and just ignore it and go off. Like, say thank you and just be polite with them as well, because like people take their time out to help you and to give advice and to get emails out for you. And so I've had it, unfortunately, a few times where people would contact me for advice and I'd give it, and then they wouldn't say anything, and then 3 months later they'll ask for more advice, and it doesn't look quite nice professionally as well. And also because the journalism, I mean, which is obviously a lot of it's on Twitter, is quite small. Word can spread sometimes, and it can put people off that, you know, this person just keeps coming to me just for advice and shows nothing at the end. So I think basic manners is like really important. Like saying like please and thank you and stuff goes really, really far. So those are my 2 tips. And thirdly, LinkedIn is quite useful as well. I only joined it recently, but I've had a couple of interesting encounters on that, so it's worth making one.
Thank you so much as well, Zisha. I think those are some really interesting pieces of advice, especially for somebody who's kind of just breaking into the journalism field and like getting their first bylines and stuff. So I'm going to go to some questions on the chat now. I'm aware that it's 6:30. If anybody needs to go, please feel free to go. But we're just going to have time for kind of 5 minutes of questions from the chat because there are some really interesting ones. So I'd like to combine 2 questions, and I'm going to ask them to Asia because from what she said, it sounds like she might be the right person to answer this. So there's somebody called Lara in the chat who said that she always shies away from pitching comment or opinion pieces, even though they're really interested in it because they don't value their opinion as a student journalist over grown-up journalists. Why would an editor commission their opinion? And also that links to the question from Lauren, who says, do you think you can be viewed differently as a student when pitching, as some editors might perceive you as less experienced? So kind of how do you overcome that? How do you kind of back yourself as a student journalist? So I'd like to ask that to Asia, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would say, I think it was something Zisha was saying earlier, that sort of like know what you're bringing. Like there's sort of like that template that a lot of journalists, like when you go to enough of these advice things, that you learn a template for pitching, and one of the key paragraphs is why should you be writing it. And I think especially when you're going for your first bylines and you're a student journalist, that is one of the most important paragraphs in your pitch, so that you can convince an editor to commission you. And so yeah, I would say really, unless you have that that part of your pitch like really clear, then you sort of like need to take a step back and think about like how, like whether you're the right person to pitch this or if you have the right experience to be pitching it. And so just thinking about exactly what it is that you bring to the table is probably the most important thing, because as you say, like if it's like, oh, an opinion piece about like something that's happened in, you know, politics, like in Parliament or whatever, they may have people on their team that they just know they can go to, their go-to politics editors or whatever, who will write those pieces. So it's really about your unique angle at the beginning, like how does this piece of policy that Westminster's just announced going to affect me as a Pakistani Muslim student and my representation at university, that kind of thing. So yeah, I would say it's probably about figuring out the why me paragraph is the most important thing, and then just like going with confidence. The worst they can do is ignore you or say no. So the more you send pitches, the more likely it is that something will come up and they'll be like, yeah, you're the perfect person, you're the first person to pitch us this. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Asia. I think that's kind of answered a lot of questions that a lot of young journalists might have about kind of backing yourself and kind of reaching out to editors, because it can be quite a scary prospect, especially when you haven't got any bylines or you've only got kind of bylines in voluntary publications like something like Empowered. I'd like to ask this question to Zisha from Simran in the chat. So Simran says, do you reach out to your sources before you pitch a story? How much of your research and interviews are done before you reach out to an editor? So Zisha, on the commissions and the work that you've done, is that the case for you? Like, do you research beforehand, or do you kind of go in with an idea and then do the research once you've got confirmation?
I think it depends on the sort of commission I get. So if it's a commission if it's a pitch that I've sent, I will do some pre-reporting, not a lot, obviously, because if it gets rejected, then you've essentially, you know, spent some time doing nothing. But like, I will try and find some potential sources. I'll try and see what there is about what's already being out there about this issue. Try and find some statistics. So when you pitch that to the editor, they will know that, yeah, you know, that this story's got some grounding in it. Because if you just pitch to an editor saying, I want to write about vaccine hesitancy, then some editors like having that conversation of, all right, can you tell me some case studies, can you show me statistics? But some editors want that pre-reporting. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Personally, I'm just somebody who loves doing unnecessary research and reading about unnecessary stuff. So for me, it's like I'll just usually put that in like my email as I go along. But other editors don't expect it. But if it's a commission that I've been given, then that's a lot more easier, because they'll be like, this is what I want you to write about. I want you to look for these case studies, just go for it. Which is, in my view, a lot more easier. So it really depends on who you are.
That's really interesting as well. Thank you so much, Zisha. And I think it's, again, quite interesting to note that a lot of people do things differently and there's no kind of one size fits all approach. And it's all about kind of judging your editor and judging your publication and judging kind of that relationship you have with them. I'd like to ask this question to Katie Williams, because you've mentioned that you've now got a job with Edinburgh Live and you're looking quite a lot at current affairs. So Meg in the chat says, what do you all think about writing opinion pieces and whether it could hinder a role in reporting or current affairs with bias in mind? So is having opinion bylines before kind of detrimental to looking for a job somewhere like the BBC, for example, where they are very impartial, very big on kind of not having that bias?
Sorry, I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, so I think, I don't know, I think you have to be careful about like what you say in terms of like opinions. You have to be a bit cautious. Because at the end of the day, like if you get hired by a company, you are then representing that company, and that's something that you'll find in most corporate companies. So I would just keep that in mind.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And I wonder if anybody else has any thoughts on that as well. So if anybody would like to jump in with any thoughts on like kind of writing opinion pieces and how you can balance that with kind of still networking and making those connections with companies that prefer impartiality. If anyone wants to jump in on that. If not, we're going to move on to the next question.
I will quickly jump in. I think it's a really tricky question because like, I don't know, I guess it kind of depends why you've entered journalism and sort of like what your personal goals are. Like for myself, I was really worried about that. Like when I was first starting out, like, oh, if I write too many opinion pieces, I don't want to come across as biased. But then sort of when I was reflecting myself, I was like, okay, the reason why I want to be a journalist is because I want the views that I didn't see in the media to be platformed and to be heard, and sometimes that does come with bias and some things that I write about I don't think are biased but could come across as biased just because of the nature of them, where they like if I want to highlight some like highlight marginalized voices, for some people that's a bias, but for me that's just me doing my due diligence as a journalist. So I think it's kind of like mired with a lot of the like politics around media and what media bias is in this country. But like personally, am I journey as a journalist, I'm like, I'm going to write what I want to write because this is why I became a journalist. So, and that people just have to deal. And a lot of journalists in like these big places have their own biases. In the BBC, like the Independent, Evening Standard, all these big like broadsheets and outlets, those individual journalists have their own opinions and biases, and they've got where they are. So
brilliant, thank you, Asia. And then final question that I'm going to put to Katie Baggett is from Gemma in the chat. And Gemma says, so this is kind of quite a specific question, but I think it links to what you were saying earlier, Katie, about kind of not needing an NCTJ to do everything. So Gemma says, if you want to go into the entertainment side of journalism, so writing about music, etc., what is the best route to go after uni? She says, I'm assuming an NCTJ is less important for that. So what are your thoughts on that, Katie? And perhaps more broadly, what are your thoughts on kind of the different directions you can go into journalism?
I think for like going into the entertainment side of journalism, more like music journalism, definitely get involved in like if you've got a student radio station. I know that's like how some of the music journalists when I was on my course like got into interviewing artists and getting like involved in music journalism. I think with the NCTJ, like really research like what options you can take on that route and whether that's going to be the best decision for you. But off the top of my head, I can think of a music website called Spotlight in the Northeast, who does a lot of like interviews with artists, and like you kind of build up your work experience from there. So I definitely say like go down the route of like getting involved in freelance journalism with like music websites and build the experience up there.
You're brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. And unfortunately, although I could talk to these lovely journalists all day, that is all we've got time for in today's panel. So I'm going to pass over to Arby now, who's going to round us off, and then you can all go and enjoy your evenings.
Yes, thanks, Eva. I just want to say thank you so much to all our panelists today. It's really interesting, so fascinating to talk to you, especially to hear how you started out from sort of not the status quo, not how you expect people to get into journalism, to hear your thoughts on that. And I hope it's been helpful for everyone who's here to hear what your experience is. Just wanted to go around and double check if anyone wants to get in contact with you, what was the best way to go, like your Twitters or whatever. If you want to either say that or type in the chat, whatever works for you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm totally happy for people to message me over Twitter or email me. My Twitter handle is @Asya which is the name on this Zoom, but with an @ and yeah, just message me. I'm very friendly, and I will almost definitely get back to you unless it like gets lost in the haze of life. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And I've got Katie Baggett's Twitter in there as well. And we'll link all the social media in all of our promo of this as well if you want to find it. Thank you so much to everyone who's come, and we'll have this recorded on YouTube as well if you want to double check, come back to it. But otherwise, thank you for coming, and hope you have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye.